Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Callie Knadley. I'm the project manager for ICBA Independent Banker Magazine, and I have the great pleasure of introducing our featured speakers for today's webinar event sponsored by CloudFlare. First, we'll hear from Paul Abramson. He is the SVP and Director of Technology at Montecito Bank and Trust. He has 10 years of banking and finance experience with prior work in information technology and security. Rita Kozlov is a solutions engineer at CloudFlare, working closely with enterprise customers to ensure their success on the CloudFlare platform. And Dragos Bogdan is the product marketing manager at CloudFlare. And now I will hand the presentation over to Paul to talk more about Montecito Bank.
Hi, everyone. So today I'm going to start out by giving you a little bit of background on our bank. We are a approximately $1.3 billion institution operating out of Southern California, and we have 10 branches. We opened in March of 1975, and one of the more interesting things about the demographics of Southern California is just how tech-savvy the user community is. And so what we've started to notice, and we've seen over the past few years, is that more and more customers and prospects are choosing to interact through our website. And so back in 2013, we took a really hard look at our web infrastructure and did a deep dive on how to redesign it and prepare for the future. And one of the main constraints that we operated under was that the website always has to be up. It needs to be fast, on demand, 24/7. And one of the most significant threats that we saw was that of DDoS. And it was a problem that we knew we couldn't solve ourselves, being the size that we are. We don't have the resources to compete with the larger institutions building out the infrastructure to handle some of the large DDoS attacks that happen all the time. So we knew we had to partner with somebody to address that, and so we took a look at many of the major DDoS mitigation providers out there, and it sort of ended up in two buckets. One was a proactive approach where it's always on protection, and the other was sort of an on as needed. If you're under attack, you can start sending your traffic through the mitigation service. And after the research that we did, we felt that the proactive approach was the best fit for us, and so that narrowed the search down to less vendors, CloudFlare being one of them. And one of the main reasons why we chose CloudFlare is because it's a all-in-one package. We get the DNS provider, we get the web application firewall, we get obviously the DDoS mitigation, and then there were some benefits outside of the security tools that our marketing team, for instance, really enjoys, which is the speed enhancements and the search results that we do better with Google searches because our sites are all SSL. They load very quickly. So the performance benefits made it a really comprehensive package, and we've really been happy with it. It's also very cost-effective and easy to manage, and it gives us flexibility overall. I mean, that's one of the major strategies of our technology team is to build flexibility into all the solutions that we provide, and offloading the front end of our website and giving us the flexibility to do whatever we need to do with the back end, whether that's with a third-party vendor, self-hosted through the cloud, on-premise, whatever we want to do, we can do that through CloudFlare very easily, and we can switch at any time we want. And now I'm going to hand it over to Dragos to talk a little bit more about the technical capabilities in detail.
Thanks, Paul. Well, I'll start just by introducing CloudFlare. Now, CloudFlare has been around for about 6 years now, a little over, and we started with the mission to help build a better internet. Now, since that time, we've grown to have over 5 million domains worldwide and 101 POPs around the world. Now, a POP is a point of presence, which basically means that we have one of our servers in a data center. Now, we're processing over 10 trillion requests per month. So that's on about 10% of all the traffic on the internet. And to really honor our mission to help build an internet, we're constantly innovating and offering a number of free services to all of our members, including SSL, which we introduced in 2014, and we rolled that out to 2 million domains. We've helped accelerate the adoption of IPv6, and the latest is like TLS 1.3. TLS is Transportation Layer Security, and that's the encryption technology that protects the internet. And we had a couple of our engineers be core contributors to the development of that. So we built a company around really two key pieces of technology, and that's reverse proxy and an Anycast network. Now, as a reverse proxy service, we essentially take the request from your visitor and forward them to one of the servers on our network. And there's a couple of advantages to doing this. And the first is just the easy provisioning through DNS. Now, when you onboard onto CloudFlare, we tell you that there's no software to configure, no hardware to install, you don't update any code, it just works. And sometimes this is a little confusing, but the way we're provisioned is it's just through DNS. So anytime a request comes in, it first comes to CloudFlare, and then we manage that connection between the user and the back end of your server. So that also allows us to do just essentially cool, innovative stuff. And I think Paul mentioned some of the other features that not only were they looking for DDoS mitigation, but then we also helped the marketing department with some speed optimizations and SSL. And again, that's just because we could manage that connection between the edge, our edge, and the customers. Also, it gives you an extra layer of security because by us acting as the middleman between your server and the visitors, we could hide your origin server and its characteristics. Now, the other piece is this idea of an Anycast network. Now, most of the internet works in terms of unicast, and we have that image on the left over here, and it's one machine to one IP address. So anytime a visitor comes to pull a resource off your app or your website, they have to travel the distance. Wherever they are in the world, they have to travel to you to get that. So that adds latency, which means it just slows down their experience accessing those resources. But it also works to suck up more bandwidth utilization by your machine as well. Now, Anycast changes that a bit. It's essentially many machines to one IP address. And what this means is that when a user comes and requests a resource from your domain, they're going to get sent over to one of the closest machines on our global network. So we typically serve about 75% of requests from our edge. So that means that your website or your app is going to see a reduction in bandwidth. And it's also going to, by us reducing distance between the visitor and your content, we're going to increase the speed of your site. Now, there's another advantage to Anycast, and that's just resilience. Now, I mentioned that we will, when a request comes in, we not only find the best path, but it's also to an available server. So if a data center were to go down or we having maintenance on a server, traffic just automatically reroutes and finds the best path to the next closest data center. So this helps also in terms of, for lack of a better term, just toughness. As we add machines to our network, we can just absorb more traffic, and this makes us particularly good at mitigating DDoS attacks. And DDoS attacks, why this is such an ongoing thing, is that they've just constantly evolving throughout the years, both in the size and volume of data that they send, as well as the complexity of the attack. So, back in 2012, we wrote a blog piece about a 300 gigabyte volumetric layer 3-4 attack. Now, these volumetric attacks essentially they're brute force attacks, and they're not very sophisticated. They send a flood of data to a particular domain or a particular network, and it's like I'd say a dumb attack where it's just trying to flood the capacity of a router or machine, and that leads to that service going down. These are the kind of attacks that, I've read in the news, high school kids launching, and they're not very technically savvy, particularly their services you could probably find on the dark web somewhere. But then in 2013, we saw a different attack, and it was a 400 gigabyte NTP reflection attack. Now, there's two parts to this. Obviously, the first one is that just the volume of the attack was larger. But the second piece of it was that now it was targeting an NTP server. NTP means Network Time Protocol, and essentially that's what keeps all of our clocks in sync on our phones and our computers and all that. So this attack was both larger in terms of volume, and it was more sophisticated in terms of just finding a vulnerability in that attack and taken advantage of it. In this particular case, what was interesting is that it also included about 4,500 NTP servers, each sending 87 megabytes of data. So it created a big volume. And, back in 2013, a 400 gigabyte attack was noteworthy. But now, here we are in 2016, and things have changed considerably. Some of the the attacks that we've seen in the news this year have been well over a terabyte, and their sophistication has grown too. So in particular, we're talking about IoT botnet attacks that attack the application layer. So what this actually means is IoT is obviously very hot right now, and we see a flood of these devices, whether they're thermostats for your house or connected cars. In this particular year, and one of our blog posts, they were internet-connected surveillance cameras that their code was leaked on the internet, and people found a way to take advantage of them, and they compromised, from the attack that we saw, I think like 128,000 unique devices that during the attack, we saw 1 million HTTP requests per second. And it's just incredible to think where these attacks could go, because, Gartner estimates that currently in 2016, there's about 6.4 billion IoT devices. And, if you start Googling this, you'll see all sorts of forecasts. I saw other numbers that by 2020, there's going to be 50 billion of these devices out there, which more than anything tells us as a company that we need to expect to see much larger attacks in the future and be ready to deal with those. Paul,
If I can chime in here, the thing with these attacks growing so quickly is you don't know how big the next attacks are going to be. So one solution with DDoS is using scrubbing centers, which you can grow them one at a time to handle whatever the load of the latest DDoS was. So say you add enough bandwidth to handle 1 terabit per second, right? But then the next DDoS is even bigger than that. So the great advantage of using something like CloudFlare, where we're building a network that's resilient, is that we can grow as these attacks grow as well, and these attacks get distributed throughout our network. So as we add more POPs, we can handle more bandwidth and not just rely on one scrubbing center. The nature of it is to distribute this attack in the first place.
Now, Paul, I know that DDoS attacks, as you mentioned earlier, are definitely top of mind for banks as well.
Yeah, that's right. And back to the question or the comment about building out the infrastructure, I think since we joined in 2014, you guys have grown probably almost double in size. So you certainly are living up to that commitment.
Yeah.
That is
it's funny because every time we mention a number on how many pops we have, it's already, someone may correct us because we're adding about one a week, I would say.
Yeah.
About that, yeah. So tell us a little bit about those vignettes that you actually introduced me to, Paul. There's two in particular. There was the DDoS ransom, and then there was also the DDoS as smokescreen.
Yeah, so I think many of you have probably seen these videos. They're on YouTube. They were created by the FDIC to kind of facilitate tabletop exercises with your executive team and your board. And two stood out as we were going through them. It was very, very easy to have the conversation because we had CloudFlare. We basically had an answer to the DDoS question. And in both cases, the example that was using DDoS as a diversion in order to exfiltrate data, if you're not really at risk or you're at less of a risk of being a victim of a DDoS attack, then that's not really going to affect you. And then in the case of the ransom example, we've seen in the past year or two that many banks have been emailed with demonstrations of DDoS attacks that maybe take the website down for an hour or so, and then you get an email that says, pay us in Bitcoins or we're going to take it down for much longer. And so that's a real threat. And one of the things that we've heard in the community is that a lot of these attackers are doing some reconnaissance on the websites, and in many cases, if you have a mitigation service in place, they will just avoid you. So that's something that does help me sleep better at night, and it does make the conversations with our executive team when we talk about these tabletop exercises a lot easier. The other thing that I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with is this new cybersecurity assessment tool from the FFIEC. And as we were going through this, it was another case where we felt good about the decision to put CloudFlare in place because there were a number of items on the list of, I think, 400 plus that we got direct benefit from having CloudFlare. So that was really great. We look forward to going over this with our regulators and having the discussion about what we have. And as Dragos alluded to, CloudFlare is constantly improving their service. So I imagine that as this tool evolves, we'll be way ahead of the curve with a lot of the new stuff that comes out.
So one of the things that Paul mentioned was our WAF. That's our Web Application Firewall. So this is one of our security offerings that allows you to protect your site. As we mentioned earlier, one of the big usages of DDoSes are as a smokescreen to distract you from another more sophisticated attack that might happen on your site. So CloudFlare can very easily act as a layer to protect you from that. And we have a few steps in which we can protect you. So the first kind of layer is our IP reputation database. So as Dragos mentioned earlier, we have a really huge network. There are 5 million sites on us. And CloudFlare has a lot of insight into the current state of the internet as a result of that. So we see every IP on the internet about 10 times a day. And this gives us really good insight into who the good and bad actors on the internet are. We see who's launching these attacks, and therefore we have a very sophisticated IP reputation database. So you can easily leverage our network and our knowledge of who's good and who's bad to decide who to let onto your website and who to challenge before allowing them to proceed onto your website. The next is our WAF rule set. So we have really great defaults, first of all, that users can just turn on the WAF and it instantly starts protecting them from layer 7 attacks. And one of the great things about the rule sets is that we're constantly updating them. And since CloudFlare is a security-first company, we have a lot of insight into what's going on in terms of the latest threats. And we can put in patches for vulnerabilities before they even become known to the rest of the internet. So we're able to put in a patch for Heartbleed the second that we knew about it that protected a lot of our customers from it.
Actually, Paul, you had yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to interject and say that prior to becoming customers, when we were still in the evaluation process, shell shock occurred, and you guys had a WAF rule deployed within, I think, an hour or two after that disclosure was made. So that was a really good thing to see.
Yeah, and what's worth mentioning about the WAF rule sets is that it's really like collective intelligence on our network, because if a customer adds their WAF rule set that could benefit the entire community, we end up rolling that out. I mean, sometimes, they'll add rules that are specific to them, and that just helps them, but it's just this idea of having, as I mentioned before, 5 million domains, each seeing all sorts of attacks, and basically that collective knowledge helping the entire community. And that's really been one of our strengths growing, is that we've had such quick adoption on our product, and it's a big reason why we offer everything from free to enterprise services, because it really, the more people we have, the more benefit we could give everybody. When you think of our WAF, the one analogy I think of is this idea of like living in a gated community. The WAF should be one element in a multi-layer security strategy. So when I think about this gated community, we're the security guard sitting in front of the community over there, just trafficking or rather policing the traffic that comes in to make sure it's legitimate. Of course, you'll still probably want to lock your doors, and from that perspective, you still have to keep good hygiene internally, in the sense of you should start when you're building your web application. You should have security in mind during the development stage. Obviously, you want to, if you have whatever libraries or frameworks you're working, you want your development team to keep an eye that they patch any potential security vulnerabilities there. Good system passwords, requiring strong passwords, and using multi-factor authentication are all things you should be considering. And at the end of the day, you could do all of this, and a savvy hacker can just call in and get a username and password. So training plays a big part in this as well.
So as Paul mentioned, one of the great benefits of using CloudFlare is that we are an all-in-one solution, and we're constantly iterating on that and adding more and more services that can be a part of our package. So the purpose here is we have a very wide variety of customers, ranging from obviously free to enterprise, and then some less technical customers and more technical customers. And we want to create as little friction as possible as a part of our mission of helping build a better internet, to allow people and customers of any size to have the best settings, be it for performance, security, encryption. So we already covered how you can use CloudFlare for DDoS protection, and how the WAF helps mitigate different types of layer 7 attacks. But we do have a few other offerings that can help you out in building a really, really strong, scalable site with little effort on your part. So DNS was a thing that was really important for us to get right, because we are provisioned through DNS. So we put forth a lot of effort to make sure that our DNS offering was the fastest out there, and it's also currently one of the largest DNS providers out there. And since every single one of our POPs, as Darius mentioned, runs the full stack, we can actually respond to DNS queries and perform all of these functions actually from any single one of our POPs that a user gets routed to. The next thing that we wanted to take off your plate, so to say, is web optimization. So we want to enable you to build the functionality that you need into your site, and take that extra step of optimization off of you and do some web optimization at the edge. So we do things like minification that can make your site a lot faster, and image compression. I think Montecito has utilized us for that.
Yeah, this works really well. I think we currently we're averaging like 80% of our web traffic is offloaded to the edge servers.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome that you guys trust us with that, and we, try to, again, introduce more and more things to make sites more performant. So with dynamic content, we introduced Railgun a couple of years ago, which allows our customers to use our network to serve dynamic content, which was previously deemed uncacheable, since you certainly don't want to serve the same HTML page to me that says Rita on it. You don't want to serve that to Paul or Dragos. So with Railgun, we introduced a way to cache those things at our edge and only go back to the origin for the small difference, which really improves the performance on your site. And we continue pushing optimization by rolling out features like load balancing, which is currently in early access. And next year, we'll be rolling out tiered caching to our customers, which would allow them to leverage our network, but then it would only go back to one of our POPs. So if content is cached there, that would take even more load off of your origin server. And again, continuing with improving performance for all of our customers, we try to introduce mobile optimization, since mobile traffic is such a big growing segment right now as a part of the overall internet traffic. So again, we try to use image compression to be able to serve at the same speed to mobile devices that are maybe on slower networks with products like Rocket Loader and Mirage. And then to touch on SSL, like I said, CloudFlare is very much security first, and making the internet more encrypted is something that we think is really, really important. So we introduced Universal SSL, which allows anyone and everyone to encrypt traffic to their site by provisioning certs on their behalf. And we also, for our higher grade customers, allow them to very easily upload their own certs. So if you already have a previous cert from your other provider, you can very easily onboard it onto CloudFlare when you're coming over to us. And then lastly, analytics. Since we do serve a lot of the content from our site and see all the traffic going back to your site as we act to reverse proxy, we have a really good insight into the types of users that you're getting, the status of your server as we're getting responses back from it. So we can report on things like status codes, visitors, views, which is all to give you more insight into your the traffic on your site.
On the SSL point, it's also worth noting that with SSL, you can take advantage of some of the latest performance enhancements like HTTP2 and server push. Mm-hmm. So an encrypted site now can be faster, not only safer, but faster than a non-encrypted site. And we know that Google, I think since 2014, has also been using HTTPS as a SEO ranking signal. So there's a lot of other ancillary benefits to use an SSL besides the security part.
Yeah, definitely. And actually next year, the new version of Chrome is going to have a little thing, the same way that EV certs currently show up as a green bar on any traffic that's not encrypted on sites not over HTTPS. There's going to be a red bar that says not secure. Yeah. So that's a very big advantage to switching over to as much encrypted traffic as possible for your site.
Yeah, so basically they went from the green lock to make you feel good that it's encrypted to an exclamation point to make you feel bad that it's not.
Exactly. So yeah, and talking about security and encryption, DNS Sec is something that is really important, a really important layer of security to add to your site. So that's what prevents man in the middle from being able to pretend to be your DNS and responding with incorrect queries and therefore pointing someone to a site other than yours. So just to give you a bit of overview, DNS is like the telephone book of the internet. So it takes the domain that you typed in. When you go to google.com, it'll tell you the IP address that you need to go to. And by nature, it's a very insecure system since it'll respond to just about anything that it gets. So by checking the signature associated with a record, DNS resolvers can verify that the requested information actually comes from the authoritative name server for that domain and not a man-in-the-middle attacker. And that's really important for top-level domains such as .bank that really need to convey trust and security to consumers, since obviously with your banking, you'd only want to trust a site that has top-notch security on it. Paul, would you like to touch on how Montecito leverages DNSSEC?
Yeah. So I think this is a really good example of, choosing a vendor that is going to act as a partner. I mentioned that in the beginning of the presentation. And, after we joined CloudFlare in about 2014 and then started seriously talking about moving to .bank in early 2015. And we knew that there were several technical challenges that we would have to find solutions to. And one of them, probably the first one that you need to focus on actually is DNSSEC. And so we were using CloudFlare for our DNS, and we knew that they were working on a DNSSEC solution. And I reached out to our account rep, and she very graciously offered to put us on the early list. So we got to test before it was actually out in production and work out all the kinks on our end. And we were able to get our .bank domain launched really quickly, and it was very little effort. The interface, again, pushing that out to them, it's very easy to just flip things like that on. Another one that's a good example is IPv6. All we had to do was flip on a toggle on the site, and our site started handing out IPv6 addresses, and we didn't have to change anything on any of the back-end systems. So they really do make the experience easy for technical people like us who have better things to do with our time than set up and build out all of this infrastructure. And another thing that I'll say about .bank is that through conversations that I've had with FTLD, I know that CloudFlare is actually partnering directly with them and is advising them on matters, and they have a really good collaborative relationship going on. So, having a vendor, and I can't say that about every vendor that we work with. Some of them have been a little bit slow to adopt some of these emerging technologies. So it makes you feel really good to know that your vendor is working and is concerned with the same things that you are, and will find solutions as new threats emerge and new requirements come down from regulators or entities like FTLD.
Well, thanks, Paul.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear.
No, you guys do a good job. I'm happy to participate in things like this. You really are a good vendor to work with.
Thanks. Well, I think we're ready to move on to some Q&A from the audience. Let's see. One of them is, so maybe, Rita, if you want to take this one on, you do this. How exactly does the onboarding process work? Because often there's some confusion that, what do you mean no software, no hardware,
Right. So since CloudFlare acts as our reverse proxy, it's very easy to onboard to us since we just take the request going to your site upon ourselves and then forward them to your server. So that does mean that we have to act as your authoritative DNS. And we do offer an alternative setup through a CNAME, but I'll go through the more widely spread use case of how to onboard a site. So it's very simple. All you have to do is you sign up on CloudFlare.com. We'll automatically do a scan of all your existing DNS records, though we do recommend that you pull your zone files from your current DNS provider just to make sure that we have full coverage. Since it's an automatic scan, we could have missed some records. And you upload it onto CloudFlare, And if you currently have an SSL cert that you're using for your site, you upload that to CloudFlare as well. And the only thing left to do is to point your name servers at your registrar over to Cloudflare issued name servers, and you are all good to go. It's actually that simple.
Another question is, how does auto-minify speed up my site? So I'll take this one. So auto-minify is just this idea that, when you're coding, as far as the person actually writing the code, they write it with indents and spaces, so it's nicely formatted and easy to read through. But as far as the computer goes, all those white spaces and extra lines just take up extra bytes. So that slowly could increase the file size, and then by virtue of that, you're increasing how much bandwidth and how much time it takes to deliver that content to your visitors. Now, Cloudflare, what we do is we take static assets. Auto-minify works on both CSS, HTML, and JavaScript, and we cache it on our servers. And because we're holding a copy of those pages on our servers, we can essentially auto-minify, take out all that formatting, all those extra spaces out of there. So when the user requests that resource, they're going to get this compressed resource that's just optimized. Not only do we bring it closer to them, so there's a speed increase there, but we also reduce the file size. And this is, again, because we are a reverse proxy, and we have this global network that's caching all of this data, and we could basically do things on our edge. And when we say on our edge, we mean like out of our 101 POPs, we can do all sorts of neat stuff. Actually, something we just announced yesterday is that we purchased Eager, and now we'll have a robust app store as well. So there's a lot of possibility in that too, to extend it in all sorts of ways. Now, the final question that we have.
Can I jump in on here too? This is Troy. I'm the manager of application development at Montecito Bank. I've been kind of lurking in the background here. One of the other benefits of some of these performance optimization stuff that Dragos was talking about is that on the development side, I don't have to worry about complicating my development process with the auto-minification stuff. Sure, you can make build tools to do that and sort of thing, but just to know that Cloudflare is taking care of it, I just don't have to think about it. I don't have to worry about it. And, not only do I get the performance benefits of minification, but it reduces my development team's effort.
Yeah, and you know what, to that point, oftentimes you could be using third-party code or services, and you don't have much control. But if we're caching it, then there you go. So anyhow, the final question is on DNSSEC, and it says, how does Cloudflare implement DNSSEC? Do you want to tackle that one, Rita?
Sure. DNSSEC is a very complicated topic in and of itself. And as with everything else that has to do with security, we want to make it as easy as possible for as much of the internet to take advantage of it. And we also want to give incentive to having the high security settings and protecting everyone on the internet. So one of those incentives is for any security setting that we introduce, we also wanted to have a performance gain. So Cloudflare uses algorithm 13 for DNSSEC, which is a variant of elliptic curve digital signing algorithm. It helps us eliminate two barriers to the widespread DNSSEC adoption. So it's zone enumeration and DDoS amplification. So zone enumeration is prevented by us being able to live sign, which is only computationally even feasible with a fast signature, such as ECDSA, or as I mentioned earlier, the elliptic curve algorithm. Just to let you know, everyone else currently uses RSA, which is significantly slower and would be impossible to do at the edge and in lifetime. And it's really important for this to be fast for us, because Cloudflare answers tens of thousands of DNSSEC queries per second, so we have to be able to answer those and generate those very, very quickly. The other benefit of elliptic curve signatures is that they produce much smaller keys than their RSA counterparts, so the DNS response is much, much smaller, and this makes it a lot more difficult for attackers to create DNS-based amplification attacks, since the amplification they would get out of smaller ECDSA record is much less impactful than the bigger response that they would get otherwise. And as you amplify these things, having something that's 4 times smaller makes a really, really huge difference when you talk about it in exponential amplification terms. So that's how we do DNSSEC, and try to really make it as performant as possible and as easy as possible for our users. Do we have any more questions, Dreas?
No.
Okay. All right, you guys. Well, thank you so much. And on behalf of ICBA, I want to thank Paul, Rita, and Dragos for that wonderful webinar presentation. And thanks to all of our attendees who joined us today. I wanted to give everyone a notification that in 2 business days you will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today's event and a slide deck file share for your review, or you could forward it along to your colleagues who are unable to attend today's event. And so this concludes today's webinar. Have a great rest of your day.